I remember the exact moment the room turned on me, like the air itself decided I didn't belong. Ploy's voice snapped across the private dining room, sharp enough to cut through the jazz drifting in from the main floor. Say you're sorry to my sister, right now, or you can walk out and don't come back. 20 faces froze mid-motion under the warm pendant lights, chopsticks hovering, wine glasses paused halfway to lips, laughter trapped behind teeth. I felt every pair of eyes land on me, the way people look at a stain they don't want to acknowledge. Across the teak table, Nira leaned back in her chair like a queen watching a servant get disciplined, chin lifted, mouth curled into that familiar question mark smile that always said, "You'll fold. You always fold." And the worst part, worse than the humiliation, was that my wife wasn't defending me. She was managing me. Like a scene. Like a problem to solve quickly before it embarrassed the family. My name is Jamin Park. I'm 34, and I build things that are meant to hold weight. Bridges, stations, elevated rail. The funny thing is, I've always believed in invisible strength. You don't notice a support beam until it's missing. That night in Bangkok, I realized my marriage had been missing support for years, and I'd been the only one pretending it didn't matter. From the outside, Ploy and I looked stable. 7 years together, 4 married, a condo near Thonglor, dinners with her parents, occasional trips when our schedules allowed. I made decent money as a structural engineer, about 3.2 million baht a year after bonuses. She worked PR for luxury hospitality, hovering around 1.6. We weren't struggling. We weren't even close. But comfort doesn't protect you from disrespect, and money doesn't buy loyalty. Because Nira was always there. Not physically every day, but like a fingerprint on everything. Her opinions, her smirks, her little jokes that never landed as jokes. Ploy's older sister was 40, razor smart, and poisonous in a way that came dressed as concern. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down and said, "Oh, an engineer? That's cute. Very practical." When I smiled politely, she patted my arm like I was a well-behaved intern. Over time, cute turned into safe, and safe turned into not exactly ambitious, and every comment was delivered with a bright laugh that dared anyone to call it what it was. If I reacted, Nira would widen her eyes and play innocent. "Relax, Jamin. I'm kidding." And afterward, in the car or in our condo, Ploy would squeeze my hand and whisper, "That's just how she is. Please don't take it personally." As if disrespect was a weather forecast. As if I was the unreasonable one for wanting my wife to stand beside me when her sister tried to shrink me in front of everyone. The retirement dinner was supposed to be harmless, one of those polished family events where everyone smiles too much and says the right things because the room is full of important connections. Ploy's parents booked a private riverside dining room with string lights that made the chow frya look softer than it really is. And the restaurant printed menus on thick paper like we were attending a wedding instead of celebrating a man stepping away from a government-linked job. People arrived dressed like they were being photographed for a magazine, tailored jackets, discreet diamonds, watches that probably had their own insurance policies. I did what I always did at these things. I kept my posture calm, my voice polite, my reactions small. I knew the rules. Let the older relatives talk. Laugh when it's safe. Don't challenge anyone's ego in public. Especially not Nira's. Of course, Nira arrived late because she liked entrances more than punctuality. The moment she walked in, the entire room turned toward her like she'd pulled a string, and she rewarded them with air kisses and that glossy smile that never reached her eyes. Her cream dress looked expensive in a way that made people assume she'd earned it. She drifted from chair to chair like a celebrity doing favors, and when she finally reached our end of the table, she paused beside me just long enough to remind everyone of her favorite hobby. "Jamien," she said brightly, like we were old friends. "How's construction?" I smiled and corrected her, gently, professionally. "Transit infrastructure." She nodded as if she'd already forgotten. Right. Beams and bolts. Nice." The obedient laughter came on cue, small and neat, like everyone had practiced. For the first few minutes, things stayed controlled. Ploy's father gave a speech about discipline and commitment, and people clinked glasses and said the right words. I watched Ploy as she smiled, and I tried to convince myself that stability counted for something, that if we just made it through the night, we'd go home, close the door, and the outside world would fade. But then Nira got bored. You could see it in the way she started swirling her wine, scanning the table like she was looking for entertainment. "So," she said loudly, "I saw a penthouse listing near Lumfini today. 38 million baht. Stunning. Ploy, can you imagine? The view alone would heal your skin." More laughter, more heads turning. Then her eyes locked onto me, bright and cruel in a playful mask. "Jaemin, you ever think about upgrading? Or are you two still in that cute little thonglore box?" I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my tone even. "We're comfortable." The word tasted wrong the second it left my mouth, like I'd handed her a weapon. "Comfortable," she repeated, slow and pleased. "That's the thing with you, isn't it? You love comfortable." She leaned forward, elbows on the table, like she was about to offer wisdom. "Ploy has a brand to maintain," she said. "She works with luxury. Don't you think she deserves to live it too?" I glanced at Ploy, waiting for the moment, waiting for her to set a boundary, to shut it down, to say something as simple as, "That's my husband." Her smile flickered. Her eyes darted to mine and then away, and she gave that tiny laugh she always used when she wanted conflict to evaporate. "Nira, don't start," she murmured, too soft to stop anything. Nira's grin widened. "I'm not starting," she said. "I'm finishing. Someone has to be honest." And as the room held its breath, I realized with a cold clarity that this wasn't just about money or status anymore. This was about whether I was going to keep letting them tell me who I was. Nira's voice kept gliding over the table like a knife looking for soft tissue. "You're a nice guy, Jaemin," she said, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. "Truly. But nice and safe isn't what keeps a woman excited. Ploy could have married." She didn't even have to finish the sentence. The implication hung there, heavy and smug, and the room reacted the way it always did when she performed. Half amusement, half discomfort, everyone waiting to see if I'd do the thing I'd always done. Smile, swallow it, and help them keep their evening smooth. Something in me didn't break loudly. It just clicked, like a latch finally releasing after years of pressure. I set my glass down carefully because I didn't want anyone to mistake my decision for a loss of control. Then I stood. Chairs shifted. The jazz outside suddenly sounded far away. I felt Ploy's stare on the side of my face. Warning, pleading, terrified. Not for me, but for the room, for her parents, for the illusion we'd all agreed to protect. "Actually," I said, and my voice surprised even me with how calm it was, "since we're doing honesty tonight, there's something I should clarify." Nira's eyes lit up, amused, like she'd been hoping I'd finally provide entertainment. "Oh?" she said. "Please, educate us." I walked around the table slowly, the way you walk when you already know where you're going. I stopped behind her chair and leaned down just enough that only she could hear me, my mouth near her ear, my tone almost gentle. "I know the investor funds you manage aren't investor funds," I said quietly. "They're down payments your clients think are going into property, but you've been routing them through a personal account under your assistant's name." For a second, she didn't move. Not even a blink. Then I saw it. The tiniest change in her fingers, tightening around her fork like she needed something solid to hold. When I straightened, the entire table felt suspended, like gravity was waiting for permission to return. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't point. I just looked at everyone and let the truth do what truth does. "I wasn't going to say anything," I said, "because it's not my family, but I'm tired of being treated like I'm beneath people who survive by cheating." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was loaded, full of people recalculating what they thought they knew. Nira laughed too quickly. "He's lying," she said, bright and brittle. But her fiancé, Rith, who'd been smiling politely all night like a man posing for a future, stared at her as if she'd transformed into someone else. "What is he talking about?" he asked, voice thin. "My firm did a structural review for one of the towers your clients were promised units in," I continued, steady. "The developer asked for background checks because there were complaints about missing deposits. I saw the paper trail. I saved it because I didn't trust what I was seeing." Ploy shot up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "Jaemin, stop," she hissed, like I'd pulled a fire alarm in a church. Her father's face drained of color. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Someone muttered, "Police," under their breath. And Nira's eyes darted around the room, searching for exits, allies, anything to turn the spotlight away from her. But it was too late. The truth had already landed. And now everyone had to decide what mattered more, the story they'd been living in or the reality sitting right in front of them. The room didn't erupt all at once. It fractured in stages, like glass under stress. Rith leaned forward, demanding Nira's phone with a tightness in his voice that told me he'd already seen enough to be afraid. Nira clutched her handbag like it contained oxygen and smiled too wide, trying to charm her way back into control. "This is insane," she insisted, laughing again. But now the laugh sounded desperate, misplaced, like a ringtone going off at a funeral. Ploy's mother began to cry quietly, shoulders shaking, while an uncle stood up and started barking about shame and family honor, words spilling over each other in Thai so fast I could barely follow. Ploy's father, who'd been the reason for this whole celebration, stared at his plate as if he could rewind the night by refusing to look up. Then he pushed his chair back and walked out with his hand over his mouth like he was about to be sick. In the middle of that chaos, Ploy turned on me. Not on Nira. Not on the fraud. Not on the fact that strangers' money might have been stolen and that her sister had been smiling through it for months, maybe years. On me. Her eyes were bright with fury, and for a second I didn't recognize my own wife. Only the version of her that had been trained her whole life to protect appearances at any cost. "You humiliated us," she said, her voice shaking. "You ruined my father's night." "She ruined it," I replied, nodding toward Nira, who was now pleading with Rith in a syrupy voice that didn't match the panic in her face. "I just stopped pretending." Ploy grabbed my arm hard, nails biting into my skin, and pulled me closer, as if she could physically drag me back into silence. "Why would you do this here?" she hissed. "Tonight?" Her breath smelled like wine and restraint. I looked at her, really looked, and suddenly I could see the pattern with brutal clarity. Every time Nira cut me down, Ploy asked me to swallow it. Every time I tried to set a boundary, Ploy smoothed it over. She didn't want peace. She wanted quiet. "Because she's been doing this to me for years," I said, low enough that only she could hear. "And you kept asking me to take it." Her face tightened like I'd slapped her, not because I was wrong, but because I'd said it out loud where she couldn't hide from it anymore. She straightened, turning to face the table, turning to face her family, her father's connections, the people who mattered to her in ways I'd never fully admitted. Then she raised her voice, sharp enough to snap the room quiet again. "Apologize," she said, "to Nira, now, or don't come home." Everything stopped, even the uncle, even the crying. 20 people held their breath like they were watching a courtroom verdict. Nira's eyes flicked to mine, suddenly hopeful, because she knew this was the moment Ploy always forced. Make me smaller so the family could stay intact. I stared at my wife, and something inside me settled into place with terrifying calm. "Ploy," I said softly, "you're not asking me to apologize because I'm wrong." Her eyes flashed. "Then why?" "Because if I apologize," I said, "you get to keep the illusion." Her mouth tightened, anger, fear, recognition, all mixed together. And in that instant, I understood that this wasn't just a fight at dinner. It was the final loyalty test, and she'd already chosen her side. For a second, Ploy just stared at me like she'd never seen my face before, like I'd stepped out of the role she'd assigned me and she didn't know what to do with the man standing in front of her. The room was dead silent. No forks scraping, no glasses clinking, no polite chatter to soften the edges. Even the river outside looked like it had paused, black and glossy beneath the string lights. Nira sat rigid in her chair, eyes wide but calculating, waiting for Ploy to pull me back into line the way she always did. Rith's hands were braced on the table, knuckles pale, his gaze bouncing between his fiancée and the floor like he was trying to keep himself from falling apart in public. Everyone else, relatives, family friends, the connections, watched with that hungry stillness people get when they're relieved it isn't their life being dismantled. "Apologize," Ploy said again louder, like volume could turn her demand into truth. "Or get out of my life." It should have hurt more than it did. Maybe it would have, if it hadn't been the same message in different packaging for years. Make it easy for me. Don't force me to choose. I felt something loosen in my chest, not like relief yet, more like a final knot untying. I nodded once, slowly, not in surrender, but in acceptance. "Okay," I said, "I'm out." Her expression shifted so fast it was almost childlike. Shock first, shock then disbelief, Then the frantic scramble of someone realizing the threat they've used for years just failed. "Jaemin," she started, stepping forward, as if she could still rewrite the moment. I lifted a hand, not angry, not dramatic, just finished. "I'll collect my things tomorrow," I said, my voice steady enough to surprise me. "And Monday, I'll call a lawyer." The word lawyer landed like a door slamming. Ploy's lips parted, but nothing came out. Nira made a small sound, something between a scoff and a plea. But even she looked rattled now, because this wasn't just a scene she could charm her way out of. This was consequence. And the family's eyes, especially her parents', were no longer fixed on me like I was the villain. They were fixed on the crater in the center of the table where their perfect story used to be. I didn't wait for permission. I turned and walked out of the private room, past the hostess stand where a young employee pretended not to notice the tension spilling into the hallway, past the glittering river view where couples posed for photos like love was something you could capture if you angled the phone correctly. The sounds of the restaurant, laughter, dishes, music, hit me in waves, surreal in their normality, like the world had refused to acknowledge what had just happened. Outside, Bangkok air wrapped around me, hot, wet, alive. I walked to my car and sat behind the steering wheel with my hands resting at 10 and 2, not shaking, not crying, just staring ahead while my life rearranged itself in real time. My phone buzzed once, then twice, ploy, then ploy again, but I didn't pick up. Not because I wanted revenge, because I finally understood something simple. If I went back now, I'd be agreeing to disappear again. 20 minutes after I spoke that one sentence, the celebration had burned down. But the truth was, it had been on fire for years. All I did was stop pretending the smoke was normal. And in the quiet of my parked car, with the city breathing around me, I felt it. Small at first, then steady, then undeniable. Relief. I didn't drive right away. I just sat there with the engine off, listening to Bangkok through the glass. The distant hum of traffic, a motorbike whining past, the muffled laughter from the restaurant patio, like the universe was mocking me with its ability to stay normal. My phone kept vibrating against the center console, lighting up the dark with Ploy's name, again and again, each buzz a tiny demand to come back and perform the role she needed me to play. I watched it the way you watch something dangerous you've finally disarmed. A week ago, even an hour ago, I would have answered. I would have tried to explain myself in gentler words, to apologize for the delivery if not the truth, to offer my dignity as a peace offering so everyone could sleep without discomfort. That reflex was still in me, twitching like a muscle memory. But I didn't move. Instead, my mind kept replaying the table. Nira's fork clenched too tight, Rith's face collapsing as his future evaporated, Ploy's eyes blazing at me like I'd betrayed her. And that was the part that cut the deepest, even now. Not that she was angry, but that her anger had a direction. She had aimed it at the person who'd been absorbing the damage for years, not the person dealing it. It made me realize something I'd been avoiding since the first time Nira called me cute, like I was a toy. Ploy didn't want a husband who stood tall. She wanted a husband who made her life smooth. I thought about the condo, our cute little thonglore box, as Nira had called it. The mornings I'd wake up first and make coffee, the evenings I'd come home late from site visits with dust still in my hair, and Ploy would be in the mirror practicing a smile for an event, telling me about some influencer she had to charm, some hotel opening she had to make magical. We'd had good moments, real ones. But threaded through all of them was the same invisible rule. Don't embarrass her, don't upset her family, don't make things heavy. I'd been living like a man balancing a glass of water on his head, careful, quiet, trained not to move too fast in case I spilled something. My phone rang again. I finally picked it up, not to talk, just to end the vibration, but the screen flashed a new name. Rith. That surprised me. For a second, I considered letting it ring out too, because I didn't want to be dragged back into the wreckage. Then I answered. Jaemin. His voice was strained, raw. Do you have proof? Like real proof? I stared out through the windshield at the river lights in the distance, steady and indifferent. Yes, I said simply. Not rumors, documents, emails, transfers. A long breath. Send them to me, he said, and there was something in that request that sounded like grief turning into resolve. Please. I will, I said. Tonight. When I hung up, the silence returned, heavier, but cleaner. That call told me what I needed to know. This wasn't going to be swept away with a family apology and a forced smile. The illusion was cracking, and people were going to start grabbing for truth whether they liked it or not. I started the car and pulled into the stream of Bangkok traffic, feeling strangely weightless, like I'd been carrying someone else's shame on my back and had finally set it down. I didn't know where I'd sleep that night. I didn't know how ugly the divorce would get. I didn't know what ploy would tell her family about me to make herself the victim. But for the first time in years, I wasn't negotiating my worth. I was just driving forward. I drove without a destination at first, letting the city decide for me the way I'd let Ploy's family decide so many other things. Sukhumvit was a ribbon of neon and brake lights, vendors still out like the night had its own economy, tourists drifting in clusters, and locals moving with purpose. Everyone living inside their own story, while mine cracked open behind my ribs. I could have gone back to the condo and slept on the couch like we were two strangers rehearsing a reconciliation. I could have called a friend and poured the whole night into a bottle of whiskey and forced laughter. Instead, I turned toward the river and booked the first decent hotel I saw with an empty room, because I needed distance more than I needed comfort. I needed a door I could close without hearing Ploy's footsteps on the other side. In the lobby, the air conditioning hit me like a slap. Clean, cold, artificial. The receptionist smiled and asked for my ID, and I handed it over with hands that looked steady, even though my stomach was still tight. It was strange how ordinary the world stayed while your personal life imploded. The elevator ride felt too quiet. The hallway carpet muffled my steps like it was trying to keep secrets. When I finally got into the room, I stood there for a moment with the lights off, staring at the outlines of furniture, the bed, the desk, the curtain that hid the city. I didn't sit. I didn't lie down. I just breathed, because part of me expected the night to snap back into place, to reveal itself as a misunderstanding I could fix with the right apology. My phone buzzed again. A message from Ploy. Come home. Don't make this worse. No, are you okay? No, we'll talk. Just instruction. Like I was an employee who'd stepped out of line. Another message followed a minute later. My dad is devastated. Everyone is talking. What were you thinking? I read them twice and felt something cold spread through my chest. Not pain exactly, but recognition. Even now, after everything, she wasn't angry at what Nira had done. She was angry at the fact that I had forced the family to see it. I opened my laptop at the desk and pulled up the files I'd saved months ago, the ones I told myself were just in case. I'd found them during that background check request at work. Strange discrepancies, deposits that disappeared, transfers routed through an account that didn't match any official business. At the time, I'd felt uneasy, like I'd stepped into someone else's mess. I saved the evidence because engineers don't trust what they can't verify, and because something about Nira's confidence had always made me suspect she survived on corners cut and lines blurred. I never imagined I'd use those documents at a dinner table. I never imagined I'd be the one to light the match. Rith texted again. I need everything you have. She's denying it. Her mother is screaming. I don't know what's real. I stared at his words and felt a flicker of sympathy I didn't expect. He'd been a prop in Nira's story, and tonight he'd realized he wasn't even a partner, just a future accessory. I attached the files one by one, and before I could overthink it, I hit send. The email left my outbox like a stone dropping into deep water. When it was done, I leaned back and let the room's silence settle around me. The adrenaline had burned off, leaving a hollow calm. I thought about tomorrow, walking into the condo to pack a life that used to feel permanent. I thought about Monday, calling a lawyer, saying the words out loud, making the end official. And I thought about the thing Ploy had demanded, an apology that would have returned me to my place. I realized I wasn't afraid of losing her anymore. I was afraid of going back to the version of myself who believed I deserved that kind of love. I slept in fragments, waking every hour like my body didn't trust the quiet. Each time I opened my eyes, the hotel ceiling looked unfamiliar, and for a split second I felt relieved. Then the memory of the dinner slammed back into place, and my chest tightened all over again. Near dawn, my phone buzzed with a string of messages that made it impossible to pretend the night had ended when I walked out. Ploy had sent voice notes I didn't open, followed by a final line of text that felt like a verdict. Don't come back if you're going to keep choosing war over family. I stared at it for a long time, and the irony almost made me laugh, as if I had started a war. As if refusing to be humiliated was an act of violence. By mid-morning, Rith called. His voice sounded wrecked, hoarse, exhausted, stripped of performance. I confronted her, he said. She tried to spin it. She said you've always hated her. Then she said it was temporary transfers and she would fix it. Then she cried and blamed stress. He paused, and I could hear other voices in the background shouting, doors closing. Her assistant admitted the account is real, he added quietly. I think I'm done. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy kind of inevitability, the way you feel when a structure finally fails after years of ignored cracks. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Not for Nira, not for exposing her, but for the simple fact that someone else had been standing inside the blast radius too. After I hung up, I showered, dressed, and drove to the condo with the strange calm of someone walking into a controlled demolition. The building lobby smelled like polished stone and expensive perfume. The security guard nodded like nothing had changed. Upstairs, the hallway looked the same. That was the cruel part. How familiar everything stayed while your insides rewrote themselves. I used my key, stepped inside, and the air felt different immediately, like the space had taken sides. Ploy was in the living room, already dressed, hair perfect, posture rigid. She didn't look like someone who'd cried. She looked like someone who'd prepared a statement. So, she said, arms crossed, are you proud of yourself? Her tone was controlled, but her eyes were still bright with anger that had nowhere safe to go, so it kept landing on me. I set my overnight bag down and kept my voice quiet. I'm here to pack. You destroyed my father, she snapped. Do you understand what you did to our family name? To my work? People are calling. They're asking questions. I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because I understood the truth. Those questions were the only consequence she cared about. Ploy, I said, your sister stole people's money. She didn't. Ploy started, then caught herself, and her jaw tightened. The denial didn't come as easily anymore. Even if she made mistakes, she said quickly, it wasn't your place. Not like that, not there. That was it. Not like that. Not there. The same logic she'd lived by her whole life. Reality is negotiable if you control the room. I looked around at our condo, the framed travel photos, the expensive candles she liked, the neat surfaces that made our life look curated, and I finally saw it clearly. We weren't partners. We were an image. And when the image was threatened, she sacrificed me without hesitation. I'm not doing this anymore, I said softly. Her eyes narrowed. Doing what? Paying for your peace with my dignity, I said, letting Nira cut me down while you asked me to smile. For a moment, something flickered across her face, fear maybe, or shame, but it hardened fast. You're overreacting, she said, like she'd been saying for years. I didn't argue. I just walked past her into the bedroom and opened the closet. Shirts, suits, hangers lined up like nothing had ever happened. My hands moved methodically, folding, packing, choosing only what was mine. And as I did, I felt the strangest thing. Grief, yes, but also clarity. Because the end wasn't really the night at the restaurant. The end was the moment my wife saw the truth and still asked me to apologize for it. I packed for an hour before Ploy finally followed me into the bedroom. The sound of her heels on the hardwood sharp and impatient. She stood in the doorway watching me fold shirts like she was waiting for the moment I'd stop, sigh, and say I'd been dramatic. That was always the rhythm between us. Tension, then my compromise, then her relief. But my hands kept moving. I chose the clothes I wore to site visits, the suits I'd bought with my own money, the old hoodie that still smelled faintly like coffee and concrete dust. I opened the bedside drawer and found the small things that said marriage in quiet ways. Receipts from trips, a ticket stub, a photo strip from a mall booth where we'd laughed too hard and looked too young. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it change the decision. Sentiment isn't the same thing as safety. Are you really doing this? Ploy asked, and her voice dropped into something closer to disbelief than anger. It wasn't a plea. It was shock that the system had failed. I didn't look up. Yes. She stepped closer, and I felt her presence behind me like heat. So you just get to ruin everything and walk away? She said. You don't get to blow up my family and then act like you're the victim. That word, victim, made my jaw tighten. I finally turned to face her, and the distance between us felt enormous, even though we were only a few steps apart. I didn't blow up your family, I said, keeping my voice low. Your sister did. I just refused to be the cover story. Ploy's eyes flashed. You could have told me privately. You could have told my father privately. You chose to humiliate us. I nodded slowly, because part of me understood what she meant. The setting had been brutal. The timing had been unforgiving. But another part of me, the part that had swallowed years of insults in the name of peace, knew exactly why I'd done it the way I did. I chose the only moment you couldn't smooth over, I said, because every private conversation ends the same way. You telling me to let it go. Her mouth opened, then closed. For a beat, she looked like she might say something real, something human. Instead, she lifted her chin, the way Nira did, and that alone told me how deep the influence ran. You're making me choose, she said, as if I was holding a knife to her throat. No, I replied. I'm noticing that you already chose. Over and over. Her eyes went glossy, but the tears didn't fall. You don't understand how my family works, she said, voice tight. You don't understand what it costs to keep things together. I exhaled through my nose, a tired kind of breath. I understand, I said. I've been paying the cost. Silence stretched. Somewhere outside, a motorbike revved and faded away. The condo felt smaller, like it had tightened around us. Ploy's shoulders rose and fell, and when she spoke again, her voice sharpened into that professional PR control she wore like armor. If you leave, she said, don't expect me to protect you. People will hear my side. They'll hear what you are. I should have been afraid of that. A month ago, I would have been. But in that moment, all I felt was a strange steadiness. Tell them whatever you need to tell them, I said. If a lie is the only way you can live with what happened, then we were never married to the same truth. I zipped the suitcase, the sound loud in the quiet room, and lifted it off the bed. Ploy flinched like the zipper had been a gunshot. I walked past her without touching her, because even that felt like it belonged to a different life. At the door, I paused. Not for permission, not for drama, just to speak one last sentence I knew she'd remember. I loved you, I said softly, but I'm done being your convenient husband. Then I stepped into the hallway and let the door close behind me, not slamming it, just ending it. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have, like the building itself wanted to give me one last chance to change my mind. I stood with my suitcase beside me, staring at my reflection in the mirrored wall. Same face, same posture, but something quieter in the eyes, something that didn't need approval anymore. When the doors opened in the lobby, the air smelled like jasmine and polished stone, and the security guard nodded again, still unaware that I'd just walked out of my marriage carrying only what fit in one case. I stepped outside, and the Bangkok heat wrapped around me like a damp blanket, immediate and real. It grounded me. It reminded me the world was still moving. I loaded the suitcase into the trunk and sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the steering wheel, the same position I'd held the night before outside the restaurant. The difference was, this time I wasn't stunned. I was deliberate. My phone buzzed with a new notification. Ploy again, a text long enough to be a speech. But I didn't read it. I didn't want another version of reality delivered to me in neat PR language. Instead, I opened my contacts and called the one person I trusted to talk to me like a human being. My colleague Minho, the guy who'd covered for me on site visits and never asked for details when I looked tired. He answered on the second ring. Jaemin? Everything okay? I exhaled, the breath shaky despite my calm. No, I admitted, but I'm out. I left. There was a pause, not awkward, just respectful. Where are you? He asked. Near Thonglor, I said. I might need a couch for a couple nights. You don't even have to ask, he replied immediately. Come. The simplicity of that almost broke me. No conditions, no optics, no demand to apologize first, just come. I swallowed hard and thanked him, and when I hung up, I sat there for a moment with my forehead resting against the steering wheel, letting the weight of my own choice settle into my bones. The grief was there, yes, like a bruise that hadn't fully formed yet, but underneath it was a strange lightness, as if my lungs had been working at half capacity for years, and I'd only just learned what a full breath felt like. As I drove toward Minho's place, messages kept piling up. Ploy's name, then her mother's, then a number I didn't recognize that I guessed belonged to an aunt or an uncle sent to do family damage control. I didn't answer. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I just knew that if I let their voices in right now, they'd start rebuilding the illusion around me brick by brick until I forgot why I'd left. At a red light, Rith's email came through. Police report filed. Lawyer contacted. Thank you. I'm sorry you got dragged into this. I stared at it, feeling a grim satisfaction. Not at the chaos, but at the fact that the truth was moving forward without my effort now. The lie couldn't be held in place anymore. It had lost its supports. When the light turned green, I drove on. The city blurred past. Street food stalls, tangled cables, storefronts glowing in the afternoon sun, and I realized something I hadn't let myself say out loud. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how lonely it would get. I didn't know how much Ploy would try to rewrite the story. I didn't even know if I'd miss her so badly it would make me stupid. But I did know one thing. Whatever came next, it would be mine. If there's one lesson this story offers, it's this. Never trade your dignity for temporary peace. Disrespect rarely arrives all at once. It sneaks in as jokes, family dynamics, and requests to let it go, until you're slowly trained to shrink yourself. Pay attention to who asks you to stay silent, and who benefits from that silence. Love that requires you to swallow truth to preserve appearances isn't stability, it's erosion. When honesty finally costs you comfort, choose honesty anyway. Losing people hurts, but losing yourself costs more, and the relief of standing in your own truth lasts longer than any illusion you're asked to protect.